IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Sachin Kalbag. I'm Senior Fellow at Takshashila Institution. Hours after the horrific terror attack on Israeli soil by Hamas militants on October 7th, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced unequivocal support for Tel Aviv. We had to wait for 5 days before the Ministry of External Affairs issued a statement that involved Gaza or Hamas in some form. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in the initial phase, when he showed support for Israel, and 5 days later, when the Minister of External Affairs involved Gaza, it was on October 19th that Prime Minister Modi spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, and they took about 12 days for that to happen. I'm quoting Nicholas Bladder, who's Associate Professor of International Relations at the Institute of Political Science at Leiden University in the Netherlands, who said that he was surprised at the initial reaction that India had, given that New Delhi had always had a balanced view on the Israel-Palestine situation. It was always in favor of the two-state solution. It called for respect for international law and to reiterate, of course, it reiterated India's position. But today I have with me Yusuf Unjhawala, who's a scholar at the Takshashila institution, to help us navigate this tightrope that India seems to be walking, given that Modi spoke with Mahmoud Abbas on October 19, but he's had several other conversations with the Israeli authorities. Welcome to the podcast, Yusuf.
Thanks, Sachin. Good to be back again.
Yusuf, how would you characterize the Indian response to the situation in West Asia at the moment? Is the tightrope too tight? Will India be able to balance itself? It has reiterated the two-state solution, but given that the initial reaction of Prime Minister Modi made it seem like India was pro-Israel in this conflict. And later on, 12 days later, India spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. Do you think that the international image was a little skewed? Or do you think that India did the right thing by showing support to anti-terror activities and then decided to weigh in on the humanitarian crisis also?
Sachin, I'm actually surprised that others are surprised by India's reaction. Prime Minister Modi reacted within a few hours after the terror incident happened. That is even before the Israelis started to respond in any way. They were shocked at what had happened. They were still clearing the terrorists out. It took about 2 or 3 days for them to clear all the terrorists out from their territory. They were coming to terms with it. And I think within hours, Prime Minister Modi responded. And he said, in this terrible hour, India is in solidarity with Israel. That is a response of a country which knows what it feels to be at the receiving end of terror. We have had our 26/11. The attack on Israel was in an order of magnitude far greater than what we faced in 26/11. So India's reaction was, as a victim of terror, was quite natural. I don't think that was a shift in India's position or in kinds of, quote unquote, pro-Israel stand. It was calling out terrorism as we saw it, as it happened, and it was the right thing for Prime Minister to do. Subsequently, as you said, the MEA reiterated India's policy, which is of a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine existing side by side in defined borders, existing peacefully. And that is our long-standing position. But what we did was differentiate between the terror attack by Hamas. We differentiated between Hamas and Palestine as a whole, or Palestinian people. And we made the right call. And we have, again, stood by the long-standing position that we have on Palestine. I don't see any change in India's policy in that regard. What possibly also is happening is that India is messaging the world, especially the West, on terrorism. There are double standards on terrorism, which has existed since the 1990s, that we were able to get them around our point of view as far as Pakistan was concerned. But recently, with what's happening with Canada, the sheltering of terrorists, the Khalistani terrorists by Canada, probably India is messaging to them as well, because Prime Minister Modi in the talk in a tweet after speaking with Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "We reiterate India is against terrorism in all forms and manifestations." This is very important. Terrorism in all forms and manifestations. You cannot say, this is freedom of speech and expression on whatever the Canadians have been telling us as they shelter Khalistani terrorists. So I don't think India has shifted its position on Palestine. I think it has made itself very clear on where it stands on terrorism.
I think that's an interesting point because as we record, this is 7th of November. On the 6th of November, the banned terror outfit Sikhs for Justice, which is headed by Gurupatwant Singh Pannoon, actually issued, quote unquote, a referendum for American Sikhs. They already had a quote unquote referendum for Canadian Sikhs, where they said that, whether you want freedom or not, whether you want separate state called Khalistan or not. And they want to do this as early as next month in the United States as well. So in that sense, signaling to America and to the West that India will not stand for terror in any form is perhaps as timely as it could come. In the sense that if we go beyond the
Sorry to interrupt, Sachin. Pannoon, I mean, you may kind of, the referendum, you may pass that off as, really legitimate political activity or something like that. But what mattered was his direct issual of threat to Indian airlines, particularly Air India. And he gave a date of November 19th, which is the final of the World Cup, and asked the Sikhs in India not to travel. That is a terror threat. That is a terror threat.
Also, it is the birth anniversary of Indira Gandhi. So he's actually calling out to Sikhs saying that please remember Operation Blue Star and what Indira Gandhi did to the Sikh community in 1980s. And we want to take, revenge, about that. This is clearly a threat, of course. But, if you want to characterize India's policy regarding terrorism, one is, of course, its policies regarding terrorism in the immediate neighborhood. But now we have a new dimension, given that Canada has been harboring terrorists that have been publicly speaking out against India and issuing threats. And both the Americans and the Canadians have not been able to do much about it. Of course, there was this whole furor about Justin Trudeau's statement that India was, a state was responsible for the killing of a supposed Khalistani terrorist sympathizer in June this year. But, if you look at it from that context, Yusuf, do you think that India can look at the whole Palestine situation, given that India's, tenuous relationship with Pakistan on terrorism? Will the Americans actually come back to us and say that, yes, we support your point of view?
Very hard to say because for Canada, it is kind of a domestic vote bank issue as well, something which India has repeatedly told. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has said many times that the Canadians are playing vote bank politics. I mean, Justin Trudeau in particular. But, Sachin, India hitting out against terror in all forms and manifestation, giving support to Israel in its hour of grief. With 1,400 people killed, women, children, there were beheadings. It is a terrible thing. There is no way India could not have condemned that. That does not mean India has changed its position on Palestine. That is very clear. India has repeatedly said that it stands for a two-state solution. It also exists in some of our other, multilateral documents where we say, two-state solution is something that will bring lasting peace, or at least hope can bring lasting peace. So we are differentiating. You know what? Because we are against terror, we can make a case against Pakistan. This is what we also face. For a long, long time, many of the countries kind of sympathized with Pakistan, and we were at the receiving end of terrorism. This is India making a case and saying, what, we've been saying for a long, long time that, you cannot support terror in any form. You cannot justify it as freedom fighter or give it any kind of a name for political purpose. So this was an opportune moment for India to make its case. And I think we did the right thing. I've seen many people condemn India or kind of, criticize the government for, coming out in support of Israel. I don't think we are in support of Israel in that manner. We are in support of Israel against the terror attack it faced. Our position on Palestine remains. We are differentiating between Hamas and the ordinary Palestinian people. There may be supporters of Hamas within the Palestinian people, which is probably there. I mean, it's likely, but we are differentiating. And we are also, the Prime Minister spoke with Mahmoud Abbas, who is the president of the Palestinian Authority. They have no control over Gaza. They lost control over Gaza long back. But India also re-messaged when he spoke with only Mahmoud Abbas about after the bombing of the Gaza hospital. It shows that India recognizes only the Palestinian Authority as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and not Hamas.
Which brings me to a question, Yusuf, that if India needs a place at the global high table, in what form should India get involved in the West Asia situation? Should it get involved at all first? And if it does, especially in the humanitarian cause, where hundreds of Gazans are getting affected, thousands of Gazans are getting affected because there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no food. How should India place itself on the global high table vis-a-vis what's happening in West Asia right now?
Such a good question, because I think India should play a very proactive role in West Asia from here on. I think there is very low credibility for the US in West Asia in terms of solving or trying to come to any kind of solution to the Israel-Palestine issue. The other big power is China. I don't think people will trust China completely. I don't think it's in India's interest to just let the whole thing just meander through and see which power is able to broker peace. In my opinion, there has to be an international effort by major powers, which will probably, which will include, say, the United States and China, maybe the EU, Europeans, the 2 or 3 big countries of the Europe, which is France, Germany, and UK. And it should have India as well as countries brokering peace, negotiating out what would be an acceptable solution to both sides and guaranteeing the peace, which would mean that, we will stand guarantee for peace for both countries so that they are not at each other's throats again. So that's one. Secondly, yes, we must be involved in providing humanitarian assistance. We have already sent our first lot of humanitarian assistance, which was about, I think, just around the time when PM spoke with Mahmoud Abbas. I think a day or so after he spoke with Mahmoud Abbas. I think we have sent subsequently another lot. But if you remember, once when Prime Minister went to Ramallah, became the first Prime Minister to visit Palestine, he, I think, 5x'd India's aid to Palestine. So this is what India has been doing, and I think we should continue with humanitarian assistance.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
America has not been able to negotiate a humanitarian ceasefire. Antony Blinken has gone to West Asia several times, not just to Israel, but to the neighboring Arab countries as well. Joe Biden made a visit there, which kind of came in, very, horrific circumstances about, when the hospital was attacked. And as a result, Jordan then canceled the meeting. The Americans said they postponed the meeting. Jordan said, they canceled the meeting. But be that as it may, given that America's credibility is not really at an all-time high, also Netanyahu, kind of rebuffed the American request for a humanitarian ceasefire. How do you think the US has done so far in the region? One. And two, I was talking to a few friends of mine in Washington, and they said that Joe Biden has lost all kind of credibility back home because of the way he's responded to the situation there, given that even Netanyahu has not been listening to what Joe Biden has requested him to do. And it shows in the polls. A recent New York Times Siena College poll said that 5 of the 6 battleground states in America is where Trump is leading Joe Biden. So this is kind of a situation where the Americans find themselves to be in a very tight spot. And Joe Biden, especially given that the elections are coming up next year, how do you see this thing progressing? Given that American credibility, like you also pointed out, is not really at an all-time high at the moment.
They are in a fix. They can't, leave Israel. They can't leave it on its own. That's the reason why, the Americans sent one carrier and then followed up with another carrier to make sure, it kind of presents a deterrence posture and prevent the war from, escalating and expanding in the region, getting Hezbollah involved and any other power proxy of Iran getting involved, in Iran itself getting involved. That has kind of, I think, helped. If you see recently, the Hezbollah chief, Nasrallah, kind of provided support, but and said, well done to Hamas, but said, all right, this is your war, and kind of has for now stayed away. It could change in the future. We don't know. It depends on how the war goes in Gaza, but it has stayed away. So in terms of deterrence posture, I think the US is currently, I think its biggest concern is to prevent expansion of the war. And I think it has been successful so far. As far as the situation in Gaza goes, the humanitarian situation goes, the Americans have been calling for a humanitarian pause, which has been rebuffed by Netanyahu. And kind of, it's a two-way thing, right? I mean, if there is a pause, then Hamas will be able to regroup and strengthen its whatever defenses. And it will make it difficult for Israel. So for Israel also, it's a difficult situation. How does it respond? Because Gaza is heavily populated. Hamas is operating from civilian areas. I mean, Hamas does not fight in uniforms. I mean, they can be in civilian areas, in civil clothes and firing rockets. Having said that, should there be a pause? Yes, there should be a pause, because I think there is no military solution to this conflict. There has to be a political solution. How that comes about, we have to see it. Clearly, the UN is not capable. I think some international forces, like I said earlier, the US, Europeans, China, Russia, maybe India, get together. I think India has to be involved in this. We have a vested interest. It's an important region for us. First of all, nearly 1 crore of our people live there. It is an important trading zone for us. The UAE, the Saudis, the Israelis are important for us. We are also planned with the new project, which is the IMEC, which is connecting India with the European countries. So all this is there. We have a vested interest. These are extended neighbors, like our neighbors practically. We cannot stay out of any solution which now comes about. And I think we can be the country which can actively assist in finding a solution. Just yesterday and day before yesterday, there were 2 calls, one between Foreign Minister Jaishankar and the Iranian Foreign Minister. And the very next day, Prime Minister Modi spoke with President Raisi of Iran. And PM again reiterated his, stand against terror, and probably had things to say to the Iranian president. And it again calls for, 2-state solution, etc. So, and what Iran did was also said that India cannot stay out of it. So there is an expectation within the region for India to play an active role. Does that mean that India takes a stand pro-Hamas in terms of, not criticizing the terror attack? No, that is just not happening. So the initial reaction that we saw against the government's position of criticizing Hamas, condemning the terror attack and siding with Israel, it does not make sense. India, I think, has got the right position, and we have the right balance. We have the right support with all parties. We are, I think, the only country which can speak with Iran, with the Arabs and Israel without a problem. So we are very uniquely placed in this regard.
Indeed. I mean, you made an excellent point. A classic example of the butterfly effect out here is that because the Israel-Hamas conflict started, the American attention to Ukraine has reduced significantly, and the next tranche of money that was supposed to go to Ukraine has not gone. The Congress has not cleared it. In such a situation, the escalation of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine could also have a significant impact in that region, which means that Biden now has 2 headaches to take care of.
I think that predates the conflict. There was issue, the US government was about to, shut down because of financing issues. Then they came to a compromise and got that passed, prevent the government shutdown. The support for war in Ukraine has been ebbing, especially within the Republicans, for quite some time now. Some of the presidential hopefuls in the Republican parties have called for a review of the US support to Ukraine. So that is a different story. Yes, but this now has created a headache for the US. They have to supply 2 parties. And as it is, the war in Ukraine had started to deplete its weapons stockpile. And, there is a shortage for the 155mm shells. There's a shortage for, ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles that they have been supplying in large numbers. But the war in Ukraine had already started to grind down to a stalemate. Russia is playing for time. So yes, there could be reverses for the Ukrainians. Now the winter months are coming, so maybe there will be kind of a time between now and spring when the hostilities might pick up. So maybe 3, 4, 5 months down the line, we don't know what can happen. But yes, at the moment there is a problem for Zelensky in terms of getting a large quantities of armaments that he needs.
You spoke a little while ago, Yusuf, about how the Americans have temporarily succeeded in avoiding a larger regional conflict. But given that the Yemen, there have been some attacks from the Yemen side, from the Houthis, and there is there are some noises coming from the Hezbollah side also. Of course, they have not done anything so far. But Syria is a joker in the pack. Jordan, given that there are some issues, historical issues with Israel and Jordan. Do you think that, the current diplomatic effort that America is pulling off is enough? Or do you think that more is needed to avoid a larger regional conflict? It could well mean that several countries then get involved in the whole.
No, I think the biggest countries over here are Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, which are clearly not in favor of any hostilities. I mean, the UAE normalized ties with Israel, with the Abraham Accords. The Egypt already made its peace with Israel many years ago. So if then what remains are the proxies, and Syria. I don't know if Assad can join the war. There are Iranian proxies in Syria. If you remember, the Israelis bombed Syrian airfields in the initial days, so that to make sure that Iran is not able to fly in any kind of equipment and to its proxies over there. So yes, I think the Americans have been really at it to make sure that the war does not expand. I think Blinken has visited the region 6 or 7 times since the attack on October 7th. So they have been trying to speak with everybody in the region to make sure it does not expand. I don't think Jordan has the kind of capability to take on Israel. Jordan itself, it depends on the US for its military equipment, as also some of practically all of the Gulf states. So what remains are Iranian proxies, and the biggest of that lot is the Hezbollah. And I think for the moment, although there have been skirmishes, there have been casualties on the northern border for Israel, but largely the Hezbollah has not gotten involved in as far as opening entire second front is concerned. So at the moment, it is working. I think it might just stay that way because the Americans are clear that they will get involved if the war expands, so as to make sure that Israel does not get harmed in any manner.
In this complex situation, how do you think India should start getting involved, more active role? To me, it does not look like the Americans are going to call India and say that, can you come and negotiate with us, or can you come and broker a peace along with us? India will have to do something on its own. Also, its response, has to be extremely mature, extremely sensitive, given that this is a Hamas thing and not an entire Palestinian attack. And, India has done well to differentiate between the two. But the overall feeling in the rest of the world, the non-diplomatic world, is that Hamas is Palestine and Palestine is Hamas, in which case it kind of defeats the entire purpose, for the humanitarian cause at least. So how should India start? It is a diplomatic conundrum, isn't it?
It is. So I think the reason why India has not even called for a ceasefire, if I think we should have spoken about this a bit earlier, or maybe I should have spoken about this. If you see any of our statements, neither the Prime Minister nor the MEA called for any ceasefire. What we did was asked Israel to follow the humanitarian laws, international humanitarian laws, which kind of means that, we are greenlighting your right to defend. Go and take the terrorists out, but make sure there are no civilian casualties. So we have not called for any ceasefire or restraint in that regard, which, in my opinion, is also due to the fact that India itself wants to reserve that right to use military force if it faces any kind of terrorist attack, which is very large in magnitude, something like a 26/11 or worse, as Israel faced. So we don't want to foreclose that option out. And that's the reason why we have not called for any ceasefire, at least not immediately. I think there will be a time where probably we can, say, this is enough. Maybe, I don't know, the PM can look at getting actively involved in by saying, let's organize a conference in New Delhi on finding peace in the Middle East. This would be a departure from India's position of not getting, involved in bilateral issues. But I think the time has come for India to play an active role. We decided not to do that even with the Ukraine. We said we are ready, or rather, we kind of gave mixed signals. Said, India is ready to do anything possible to bring peace, and that's quite open-ended. But maybe the Prime Minister can kind of, especially which is stature within the region. So many of the Gulf states have conferred their highest civilian honor to Prime Minister Modi, so he carries some weight over there. Even the Palestinians have done so. So maybe I think Modi can take a call, invite the regional leaders as well as the US, and see if we can sit together and start some initial talks, because there is no military solution. I mean, Israel is in a very tough spot, but I don't see a military solution. They cannot get into Gaza. They cannot occupy it. It's a hostile territory, and it's not going to bring it peace. No matter how many people it kills, no matter how many Hamas terrorists it kills, because you don't know how many exists over there. It can be 20, 30, 50,000 Hamas cadre over there. How are you going to find out and kill all of them? Because that is a stated goal of Netanyahu, who says he's going to finish off Hamas. What do you mean by finishing? So there has to be a recalibration of what the end goals are and how they can say, we have achieved our objectives. Now let's sit and talk. But then the question is going to be, who do you talk to? Because obviously it's not going to be Hamas. Even Secretary Blinken of the US has said a status quo cannot continue, which means that they will not allow Hamas to be the governing party in Gaza. And that means they would like the Palestinian Authority to come back. Does the Palestinian Authority have any credibility in Gaza? Because in 2006 they were defeated, and that's when Hamas came in. So how are they going to achieve that? All these questions have to be answered, and probably India can start to play a role in figuring out answers to some of those questions.
And as you pointed out, Yusuf, India is perhaps the only country that can talk in a neutral, fair manner with the Arabs, with the Israelis, and the Americans. With that, we come to the end of this episode. Yusuf, thank you so much for joining me on this wonderful episode of All Things Policy. I hope to connect with you again on some other burning issue. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Sachin. Great to be back here, and look forward to the next time.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.